Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, July 30th, 2015. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, Chris Colby of beerandwinejournal.com joins us to talk about black malt, myths surrounding it, uses of it, and ideas for a black beer to blend with others that you have on tap to make new styles. And Chris puts in his 2 cents on the IPA gives you man boobs story that's been circulating. If you're new to homebrewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And if you buy one of our DVD combos, any of our DVD combos, you get a free basic brewing bottle opener. It's good to see people doing that. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing. We're on Google Plus as well. And thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Obviously, you know how it works because you use it a lot. Whenever you think of Amazon shopping, think of us and click on our associate link first on basicbrewing.com. It's on the right-hand side of the page. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show. I greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site as well. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes, our Android app on Amazon.com. We have a Windows Phone app. We're on the BlackBerry Podcast Directory, and we're on the Stitcher app as well. And if you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, so to speak, or a ukulele case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support. Thanks to everybody who's done so already. I mentioned that Andy Sparks and I, you know Andy. Andy is my local homebrew store owner. Thehomebrewery.com is his store. Andy and I brewed up a big barley wine for a cookout at Jack McAuliffe's place with the help of Jack and the recipe from Don Barkley, who worked with Jack at the original New Albion Brewery way back in the day. Well, that cookout was this past weekend, and I guess the beer went down well with the attendees because I took home an empty keg. The beer was very tasty, and it was great to spend some time with everyone out there. Homebrewers brought homebrew, and people from the Bentonville Brewing Company brought a keg of pale ale, which was also very tasty. And we haven't talked to them yet, the people from the Bentonville Brewing Company, new brewery up in Bentonville, north of us. Thanks very much to Jack's sister Kathy and her husband John for hosting the event. And John smokes up a mean Texas brisket. It was very tasty. Let's take a look into the mailbag. Joe from Parts Unknown writes in with this. I recently acquired my first fridge for fermenting and built a temperature controller for it as well. Of course, having only done ales and stouts up to this point, I was itching to do a lager. I chose an award-winning Munich-style lager recipe, and off I went. Joe says, the problem is I misread how long to wait before increasing the temperature for the diacetyl rest, and ended up close to final gravity by the time I realized it was time to do so. My original gravity was 1054, and the final gravity should be 1012, and I'm at about 1016 already after 10 days at 54 degrees. My question is, says Joe, how long would you expect an adequate diacetyl rest to be at 65 degrees Fahrenheit, given that the majority of the yeast are likely to have fallen out of suspension already? The recipe says 24 to 48 hours, assuming you started the diacetyl rest at the right time, and the best my local homebrew shop guys could estimate was that I might need to leave it at 65 for more like 5 to 7 days. Do you think that's adequate, more than necessary, or do I need more time at 65 before racking to secondary and lagering at 34 degrees? Well, in my opinion, the best way to tell if you need to extend the diacetyl rest is to give the beer a taste. As you probably well know, diacetyl gives the beer a buttery or butterscotch flavor, and as I could tell from my limited experience judging lagers in homebrew competitions, some beers do need a diacetyl rest. Bringing up the temperature a bit at the end of a lager fermentation allows the yeast to clean up those buttery flavors. So in my mind, if you taste your beer, where Joe's at in that fermentation process, and the beer tastes good, then I think you're good to go there. So if it were me and the beer tasted clean and not buttery at that point, I would think it would be safe to go ahead and ramp down to the very cold temperatures for the extended lagering phase. So it seems like if there's no diacetyl there, that the yeast has already cleaned it up. That's my opinion. If you have a different opinion, or if you have experience in this, if you have an experience where, diacetyl shows back up, after you ramp down from a diacetyl rest, please write in and let me know. I know that diacetyl can come from contamination sometimes, but anyway. So that makes sense to me. If the beer tastes good, go ahead and chill it down and lager a long term. Appreciate the note, Joe. I talk about our ongoing sponsors, Desiree and Dave of High Gravity in Tulsa, every week. And this week I want to share parts of an email exchange with them. I got a letter from Brian in Baltimore, and Brian said, "I'm writing because I trust your expertise and would like your advice on a controller for the recirculating electric brew-in-a-bag setup that I'm building. I'm looking for control of my 120-volt Blickman boil coil and March pump in a single unit." Well, I told Brian that I only have experience with one such similar controller, and that's the one that I got with my electric brew-in-a-bag setup from High Gravity in Tulsa. And I'm very happy with it. It works very well. So I sent Brian's email to Desiree, and she replied, "We do have a 120-volt brew-in-a-bag system and sell the control unit separately for those putting together their own system." And then Dave also replied, "I wanted to mention that we also build the 120-volt version of the EBC SV controller," which is what I have, "which includes manual pump control for convenience." So there you go. There's a lot of flexibility there. If you're building your own system and just need a controller, High Gravity offers you flexibility. Check out all their electric brewing systems and their various controllers at highgravitybrew.com. And for ingredients and many other products, High Gravity offers $7.99 flat rate shipping. Check out all the stuff at highgravitybrew.com. And I'm sure if you have questions about electric brewing systems and such as that Desiree and Dave would be happy to field those as well. We are halfway through our content from San Diego and the events surrounding the National Homebrewers Conference. I've been recording new material lately as well, so I'm going to start putting some of that into the feed for variety's sake, and we've got some traveling to do and such as that, so I'm trying to pre-produce a lot of stuff. Lots more good stuff coming from San Diego, and there's a lot of good stuff, too, that I've recorded since then, like this week's discussion with Chris Colby about black malt and man boobs. Well, Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
Is it hot in Bastrop, Texas?
Yeah, it's very hot.
It's hot. It's hot enough to roast grain out there in your yard, probably. Well,
yeah, it's a lot of people are sweating under their tinfoil hats right now.
That's dangerously close to politics. We are here to bust, or at least attack a couple of myths in the brewing world. Man boobs and black malt, or myths surrounding them. They exist, but but these myths are about them. First of all, let's do the funner one. I've seen articles for years now, I think, about hoppy beers giving men man boobs. And so what about it? How much truth is it in there that our favorite beer flavoring ingredient is affecting our figures in an unusual way?
There's basically no truth to it at all. Where the idea comes from is that hops have a variety of different compounds in them called phytoestrogens. The prefix phyto simply means plant, and estrogen is, estrogen, a sex hormone in mammals. And anyway, one of these compounds that's pronounced however it's pronounced, but it's abbreviated 8PN, is actually a fairly potent phytoestrogen. And so what people have said is that, hey, hops have this phytoestrogen in them, therefore that has all these estrogenic effects in people. But what nobody's done is actually proven that. And in order to really say that, if you were going to, really make a claim that drinking IPAs gives you man boobs, you would have to do an actual scientific study. You'd have to have a group of people drinking, IPA, and then a group of people drinking, wine or something that didn't have hops in it, and compare the two. But none of that's been done. All that's been done is people looked and have said, oh, hops have phytoestrogens, therefore it must give you man boobs. But there's no proof of it. And also the huge thing that overlooks is dosage. The poison is only a poison when it's at a certain dose, or anything that's biologically active is only biologically active in a certain range. Below that range, it doesn't have an effect. And nobody has done a study to show, there's been a couple studies to show how much 8PN gets into beer, which ranges from nothing to 20 micrograms per liter was the highest. But nobody has shown, okay, what's the, of that particular phytoestrogen, what's the level in people that would cause an effect. So it's really, there's really just so many problems with that idea, is that they don't know what the effect of this 8PN is at different concentrations, at different dosages. They don't know how much there is in different beers, because it might vary by hop variety. They also are confusing, you go to a lot of beer festivals, and there's, some overweight people there, and some of the guys might have sort of big chests or whatever, but there's a difference between just a fat guy and someone with man boobs. Like, man boobs actually have sort of the working breast tissue inside them, and in males the development of breasts is called gynecomastia, and it's like an actual hormone mediated growth of tissue in the breasts. Whereas, just being a fat guy is just being a fat guy. It's not. It's different than developing actual gynecomastia, and the female milk producing parts of the breast is different than just being a fatty. So yeah. So basically, that I've seen that charge a couple times, and then there was this recent article about IPA gives you man boobs. So I wrote this article that it's titled "IPAs are not giving you man boobs," to sort of explain the science behind it, and explain that it's just right now it's a complete stab in the dark, and there's no real evidence for it.
So beer, or any other thing that you eat that has a lot of calories in it, could be contributing to fatty deposits on your body in one place or another, but it's not actually causing development of a gland on your person.
Right. One thing in what happens in gynecomastia is that the actual milk producing stuff starts to develop, and in a male, if you would feel around your nipples, you would feel like a hard sort of disc underneath there forming. And whereas if you're just a fat guy, it just feels like you're a fat guy. So
this isn't the voice of experience. I know it isn't me. I know it isn't me.
I'm checking myself right now. Okay, cut off the cheeseburger. Note to self.
Yeah, I know not to stand and look at myself at a certain angle in the mirror anymore, but that's another thing. Uh, but the dad bod is back, or the dad bod is in. I've also read that, and I tend to believe those articles. So there you go. It's self media bias there. Well, on to more practical things in the brew house. Black malt. I don't think we've talked about this. You in the article you call it black malt. I've used black patent malt. What's the difference?
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Oh, okay.
It's some people call it black malt, some people call it black patent malt. It's different maltsters.
And as I understand, the black patent, the name black patent malt comes from the patented drum roaster that was invented in the 1800s to actually to roast malt in a better way, and so to differentiate that malt from just the ordinary black malt, they started calling it black patent malt. But I guess some suppliers are dropping that name now.
Yeah, I'm like history is not my forte, but yeah, I mean at that time there were a lot of like brown malts made, and from what I remember, like the new drum roasting technique came, and so they named it black patent malt to sort of say, look at us, we got a patent, you know.
And what are the misconceptions or the myths surrounding black malt?
Well, black malt's got and it sort of traces back to a lot of the old school homebrew sources that would talk about it. It's got a bad reputation among some people who believe it tastes like burnt. That's a descriptor you hear quite frequently, or acrid. And neither one of those is really the case. If you look at black malt, it's very, very dark. So I mean, I think it's part suggestion on some people's part when you see it, and then you've heard it described as burnt. You immediately say, well, yeah, that makes sense. But if you look at how black malt is actually produced, it isn't ever burnt in its production. There's a difference between it's roasted, but it's not burnt, and they're roasted and burnt are two different things. Black malt is made by they start with pale malt. It's full sized when they start, although it loses weight during the roasting, and they heat it at it's like 220 to 230 in that range Celsius, which is like 420 to 450 Fahrenheit, and they roast it like that for about 4 hours. So it's intense heat, it's literally as hot as an oven, a hot oven even, like for 4 hours, and it's in a drum roaster, and during that time it gets intensely roasted. And another thing that happens is another thing, it's continually sprayed with water so that it doesn't dry out completely while it's going, and all the I'm not sure the exact technical details of how this is, but all the aromatic compounds that get produced and come off the malt actually get vented from the kiln. So when you end up, you've got a very dark malt with actually very little aroma. And here's the neat thing: like if you're trying to teach someone about black malt and they're convinced that it smells acrid, all you got to do is smell it. Just pick up a handful. And then, for the best case, take a handful of roasted barley, and in the other hand, relatively the same amount, and smell both of them. The roasted barley, which is a dark malt that goes in stouts a lot of time, has a sort of rich roasted flavor or aroma with a lot of coffee notes. But comparatively, the amount of aroma in the black malt is very subdued, and it's got sort of a neutral, roasty, dark roasty character.
I think technically roasted barley is not a malt; it's just roasted barley seed, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's why it's called roasted barley instead of roasted malt.
So you could have your own taste test.
Yeah, and also if you brew with it, an interesting thing is because our our sense of taste is heavily influenced by our sense of smell. We've only got I don't even know the count nowadays. There's when I grew up, they told me there was four basic, sweet, sour, bitter, whatever the other one was, and then umami came along, and I guess recently I heard of some other one that was supposedly fatty was a new, but there's only a small number of actual taste differences, and the rest is all sort of filled in by aroma because you can smell just I don't even know what number it would be, but a huge number of different smells. And so anyway, if you brew with black malt, what you'll find is it adds a lot of color to a beer, but given that it doesn't add a lot of roasted aroma, the flavor of it is pretty subdued. And in fact, if you were to close your eyes and drink a beer that has enough to darken the color, seriously, you might not even pick it up. If you're looking at it and it looks dark, that because that also influences your perception of a beer. But just on its own, it adds a roasty flavor, but it's really pretty subdued. Especially when you look at the grain, it's like black. You think that this must be like going to add just this big punch in the face flavor, and it's really comparatively mellow.
Yeah, I have my own story about black patent malt. Back when I was a wee new brewer, I brewed a robust porter with, I think it was 8 pounds of amber malt extract and 1 pound of black patent malt steeped, before I added the extract. And a pound, that's a lot. And so if you think that that black patent malt would add an ashy or acrid flavor, that it would really come out in the beer, but the robust porter came out very good. In fact, it won the only homebrew competition that I've ever entered. So it was very, very tasty. And 10 years later, I still had a bottle of it, and Steve and I opened it and shared it, and it was still good. So when I went to duplicate the recipe, I brought the recipe to Andy's store, and Andy's like, "You didn't put a pound of black patent malt in this." And I'd say, I think I did. It was years before. And so I did the recipe again. And sure enough, a pound of black patent malt steeped with that recipe, at least counterbalanced by that amber malt extract, came out to be a very, very tasty, roasty, robust porter. So there you go, personal experience.
Yeah. Back in the day, Sierra Nevada Stout used to be made entirely from black malt. These days, it's a blend, at least according to the website. But back in the day, it was just if you were going to brew a homebrew equivalent of it, it would be about a pound of black malt and the rest just pale malt and whatever you need to do to round it out to round out your grain bill. That was an American stout, so I guess there'd be a little bit of crystal malt along with it. But yeah, and that beer was, it was good. It was nice and roasty, but not overpoweringly so. Super dark though, and that beer was a good beer to, if people just refuse to believe that black patent malt doesn't lend all these horrible flavors. Just try this. That was a good way of showing people.
Yeah, that robust porter of mine was pretty dark as well. It could have been called None More Black, but so how do we use this stuff? I mean, if the myth is dispelled that it's acrid and ashy, and if you use too much of it, how do we use it? I mean, what are the best uses for black patent or black malt?
Brewers have a couple uses for it. One is obviously it's a dark roasted malt. If you want some dark roasted flavor, you can go ahead and use it. And it's like I said, it's fairly mellow, but that's compared to its the outward appearance. So it's not completely neutral or whatever, but black malt works well in stouts and porters. It can work well in a brown ale, which I think a lot of people tend to think that that would be too harsh for a brown ale, but in fact not at all. You can use it in any dark beer where you want some roastiness, and I've really found that it blends well with the other, like all the dark malts. There's roasted barley, there's black malt, there's different kinds of chocolate malts. All those roasty malts, at least the good examples that come from good maltsters, tend to blend together pretty nicely. If you like that sort of dark roasty flavor, and so you can use black malt alone to add roastiness to beer, or you can use it in a blend with other malts. And then the other use for black malt, since it contributes relatively little flavor with its color, is people use it as just a color malt. You can add, in a 5-gallon batch, you can add at least 2 ounces without there really being any flavor, and maybe 3. It depends a little bit on the exact, which maltster it comes from and how dark it is and all that. But you can add 2 or 3 ounces to most beers, darken them significantly without really getting much of that roasty flavor. And so, like a Schwartz beer is a good example of the use of that malt. Schwartz beers are, they're similar in taste to a Pilsner, but they vary in flavor from tasting pretty much almost exactly like a Pilsner to having, just a little bit of a roast character. And these are made usually, there's more than one brewery that makes them, but usually with either black malt or debittered black malt, or sometimes with a malt color agent, but that in turn is usually made from a black malt or a debittered black malt.
What's the difference between just plain black malt and debittered black malt? Is there a radical difference between the two?
Yeah, debittered malt, which is also called dehusked black malt, is, but the husk is removed, and that tends to lead, because some of the more in the very darkly roasted grains, you get a little bit more astringency out of them than you do with less darkly roasted grains, and that astringency is often described as a roasty bitterness. Like coffee. Sometimes people say, "Oh, coffee's bitter," and well, it's really more astringent than bitter. But the dehusk takes away a little bit of the edge of black patent, because you get at low levels it's pretty neutral. At higher levels, when it's more roasty, it does have from the astringency that it gives a little bit of a sharp edge to it, and that's actually something that can be very nice in a porter or stout if it doesn't, if it's not out of control. But there are some recipes that people may want to not may not want that part of the contribution of black malt, and you can go with they're either called dehusked or debittered black malts, and they have the husk removed, which removes that quote unquote bitterness. And if it's the Weyermann, the German maltster, also has all their dark malts are also they have the special version of them, and what special means in that case is dehusked, so you can get all their dark malts. Like Carafa 3 Special would be dehusked Carafa 3.
Now, if you are going to use, that pound that I used was in an extract batch, and it was steeped. I usually, my approach was usually to put the steeping grains in a bag, in the water cold, and then leave the bag in there as the water heated up, and as when the water got up to 170 degrees, I took the bag out. But in mashing, I mean, if you're going to use 10% black malt in an all grain recipe, what's that going to do to your pH? And would you be better off in mashing the just your pale malts on their own and doing a steeping thing in the kettle afterwards, or doing what I think Gordon Strong recommends and mixing in the specialty grains after the mash? Would that be a safer approach?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of different approaches that people use to with black malt and any of the dark grains. Really, you can steep them on the side, you can cold steep them on the side, you can mash them as you normally would you can go through your mash until the last 15 minutes and then stir the dark grains into the top. An interesting thing about black malt, that it's different from most other less highly killed malts, in that black malt, when it gets out of the kiln, it's been heated so hot for so long that it's sterile. And of course, it can become recontaminated when it gets out of there. But you can add it into beer if you want to. So you can steep it in the kettle, like you said, like I just said, you can exactly steep it in beer if you want to, in a manner akin to dry hopping. So yeah, there's a lot of variations. When I use it, I tend to just stir it into the mash like normal. Just take care of my water chemistry. You're gonna want to look for getting some carbonates into your water, and to counteract the effect of the dark malt. Although you don't, there's various formulas for how much drop in pH various color malts do. For the darkest malts, they actually don't drop the pH quite as much as you would think, given the color and based on the curve from the other malts. And also, it's not brain surgery, but basically, if you have a pH meter and a source of carbonates, either calcium carbonate or even better, sodium bicarbonate, calculate how much you think you might need, put that in, and keep in mind those minerals tend to take a while to dissolve. But towards the end of the mash, check and make sure that you settled into a region that you've got a decent pH, and that should do it. And the other methods, I've heard, steeping it separately can be just a convenience thing. For one thing, if you make pale beers all the time and you know that your water works well, mashing wise, then yeah, sure, mash the pale grains separately and steep the dark malt separately, and then combine them. I've heard it claimed that if you do the cold steeping, it makes for a less aggressive beer. Although I would say just add less of the malt, but what do I know? Also, I don't know, just pretty much anything when people say, "Ooh, this makes a less aggressive version of this," I always tend to think, what's wrong with the aggressive version of that? But that's just me. And then there's the idea of stirring the black malt into the top of your mash at the end. Supposedly helps with lautering. If you've had problems with lautering, sure, try it. I tend to think it's just an extra step that you can skip, but not everybody's lauter ton is set up like mine, so maybe there is some use for that for some people. And I'm going to go ahead and doubt that most homebrewers probably aren't going to experiment with using black malt in the steeping it in finished beer, but you can also add it in the kettle if you want. Just sort of bag it up like you would hops. And again, that just seems more complicated than you need. I would just throw it in the mash. But everyone's got a different setup. Everyone's got a different idea of what they're trying to do, and that might be, it might be helpful to know that you can add it at just about any stage you want.
You've also got an article on beerandwinejournal.com about extra dark blending beers. And so if you've got an extra dark beer on tap on your kegerator, you can do some on-the-spot blending and take some sort of more traditional styles or less dark styles and darken them up a bit and come up with something more interesting.
Yeah, that idea was something I had a while ago, and I tried it, and I tried to make like a crazy dark, like a 20x concentrate of like this super, super, super dark stout. And then the idea was that I'd add a little bit to like pale ales to make, you could add it to your pale ale and suddenly make an American stout. And I found out like color-wise it worked, flavor-wise it didn't. And so a couple, turns of the experimentation led me to believe that, or demonstrated to me that if you make the dark beer not quite so concentrated, you can make a blender, and you can basically just have pairs of beers that you serve at the same time. Like I'm going to do a couple examples this week, and like one will be if you brew an American IPA, you can brew like essentially a double strength double color black IPA, and then mix it into use that dark beer to transform the American IPA into a black IPA. So then you have, you'd have like a full keg of IPA, and then a smaller batch of the black blending beer to turn. You could pour an IPA and say, oh, I want an IPA, and drink it, or you could pour an IPA and say, oh, I want a black IPA, and add the darker beer, color that up, and I go through. Like I said, this coming week I'm going to post a couple examples of. There's a couple of real simple things that you can do to turn I'll use American IPA and black IPA as one of the examples. But other examples I give in the article are, you can basically take any amber-ish ale and turn it into either a brown ale or a brown porter by darkening it a little bit. You can turn any Pilsner into Schwartz beer by adding a little dark beer. And, you can even turn any sort of dark beer into a darker beer by adding that. And, it's just for me, it's an interesting idea because I like having, when I have beers on tap, it's, more different varieties are better. And having a dark blending beer is, it's I don't know, it's fun. It's also cool if you have a number of beers on tap at a party and you have a dark blending beer, you can just make a dark version of everything and just sort of, try it out. And so, if you had 8 pale to amber beers on tap, and you brewed enough of the blending beer, well, now you have also 8, dark beers that, depending on what the base beer is, if you can make a darker version of it that's good, you can do that. So, yeah, that's an idea that I've been interested in for a while and experimented with a little bit over the past, I don't know, it's been a while since I've done anything like that, but.
So in theory, this extra dark blending beer, you wouldn't want it to be too bitter. Because you don't want to add bitterness to all of these styles. You might want to add bitterness to an American IPA, but you wouldn't want to add bitterness to a mild or a Pilsner. So it'd be fairly neutral on the bitterness side. You would think that it would be fairly neutral on the roastiness side too, right?
Well, what you want is. You want the beer there's 2 different ways you can do it. You can do one, you can just make sort of a generic, very dark beer to blend into anything. And then you'd want bitterness and body and everything to be sort of middle of the road. But you can also make, you can take a specific pair of beers and brew the beers on purpose. And for example, The example that I'll actually do, one of them will be American IPA and Black IPA, and for that, for the dark blending beer, you would want that beer to be as hoppy as your IPA, because when you blend it together, you don't want to blend down the bitterness. So you'd want the dark beer to be as hoppy as the IPA. You would want it to be as attenuated. If you could do it, you'd get a little bit more dark malt in that. But you'd want it to be basically the same, except twice as dark as a normal black IPA, so that you'd pour, or that's at least one of your options. If you made a 2X blend, you could then pour, let's say 8 ounces of American IPA into your pint glass, and then 8 ounces of the double strength black IPA, and you would then have a pint of black IPA.
I guess the danger too with making the black beer too neutral and boring is that then you would have this beer on tap forever in your house. If nobody drank it on its own, you would just have this black beer station at the end of your at the end of the kegerator that took forever to replace.
Yeah, and that's another interesting thing, because if you make like a 2X or double strength color-wise dark beer for a black IPA blend, actually puts you in the range of sort of like a porter. So it's your dark blender beer could actually, you could drink it on your own as a porter. So there, in that case, you potentially have, you brew your base beer, the American IPA, you brew your blending beer, and you can use it to blend, but you can also drink it. So there you brewed 2 beers and you've got 3 different types of beer to drink.
There you go.
And you can also, another thing you can do, you can make a 4X blend, and that might put it out of the dark beer out of the range of drinkability. But then you would pour 1 part of the dark beer and then 3 parts of the lighter beer to make the normal, the single strength or 1X version. And I've just found, like I mentioned earlier, that the darker you try to make the blending beer, just the worse it turns out, because there could be it's potentially partially a problem with just the mash. Like if you're making something that's got proportionally 20 or 30 or 40% dark grain in the mash, obviously you've got to figure out something to do for the pH. And then I also just think, I have no evidence for this, I'm not claiming this is a scientific thing, this is just a guess at this point, that the solubility of the different things that come out of the husks of a dark beer, there's the color, there's the astringency, there's the flavors. I think when you get a lot of dark malt, and then potentially there's also the influence of pH on that they don't all come out at the same rate as they do in a paler mash, and so that it just tastes not as good. I would have to go redo the experiment and taste it more closely. I just remember the first couple times I tried super dark ones, it was like, yeah, that's a really dark beer, but then even after blending, you're like, that's the flavor coming from the dark malts just seems not like horrendous or anything, but just like not right, not the nice full roasty nice flavor you get from a porter. It was more like sort of just dark. I can't even describe it. Just not quite as good malt character.
Overdone.
So, yeah. So I like recommending make a between a 2X and a 4X dark version of the beer, and you're probably not going to want to brew, like if you're brewing a 5-gallon batch of your beer to be blended, you only need to make like a gallon or almost 2 of the blending beer. You can make bigger batches if you say have 5 different 5-gallon batches of IPA on tap. You could make 1 keg, 5-gallon corny of a 2X or a 4X blender, and then you could turn all those into a version of a black IPA. But you don't have to brew a ton of the dark beer, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Another excuse for a small batch.
Yeah, exactly. You can just knock out a little countertop partial mash, and that'll be, or even you can even do it as an extract beer for your blender, if you want to.
That's true. Then you don't have to worry about the mash stuff.
Yep, that can be very handy too. Just steep the grains, and then stir in malt extract for the fermentable sugars.
Well, very nice. It's probably about time to start thinking about brewing some darker beers, because I hope it'll get cooler one day.
Yeah.
And I'll feel like drinking something, a little darker and maybe even a little heavier. But right now in the middle of summertime, typically you don't think about drinking dark beers, but, you can play with that as well. So,
yeah, I think for us in the South, I think the worst is yet to come this summer. I think we've got some pretty hot days coming up, but it's been fairly mild here. Not terrifically mild, but I can't remember if we've even had any over 100 days yet, which is a little unusual for us, but
yeah,
not terribly.
Yeah, it's hot, but
it's hot.
Well, hi, Chris. It's good to talk to you again, and everybody can check out those stories and much more on beerandwinejournal.com. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, James.
Thanks again to Chris. We're getting more and more visitors all the time to beerandwinejournal.com. Chris continues to add great content, and I think it's one of the better resources on brewing out there, but I'm biased. So check out all the good stuff, the articles that we talked about this week, and just a ton of good stuff back in the archives, I guess you'd say, of beerandwinejournal.com. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. You can get a free Basic Brewing bottle opener with any of our DVD combos. You can check out our shirts in the store as well. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Truly Mexican, essential recipes and techniques for authentic Mexican cooking. And Lego Ninja Turtles Turtle Van Takedown Building Set. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. And don't forget, you can also join the American Homebrewers Association and subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine through the associate links on basicbrewing.com. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.